Okay, everybody, it's time to get going. It's time for Pastor's Bible study. Julia was making fun of my lack of tan. We've been in Hawaii, which we're so grateful to have gone and have a little bit of a break. And I thought I would get so tan, but then I thought, why would I think that? I've been to beaches before, and it does not happen. So I sunburn, and then it peels, and then. So look, I protected myself well. Yeah. The reality is, it's a 5-hour difference in time, and so I am a little bit jet lagged today. So this is one of my favorite sections of Samuel, though. So as we study it tonight, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 8 tonight, and this is a really momentous part of 1 Samuel. I mean, this is a big shift in the life of all of Israel. And so much will change from this point forward in the whole story of God. And so this is an important night to come and read this text. So let's get started. We're going to read, I think I'm going to read the whole thing. Let me just look at this. I'm just going to read the whole thing. No, I'm going to read the first 9 verses. I'm going to read the first 9 verses and then we'll go from there. Okay. So when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. The name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. And they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do." And then we'll pick up in a second. Okay, what is it that you're noticing in this section, Kate? Okay, Samuel's sons do not follow in his footsteps. We want to come back to this thing, this reality, okay? For not just to understand the biblical context, but there's a lot of application here, okay? So don't let me forget to come back to this. But Samuel's sons are not walking in his footsteps. Diane?
Something I don't know if I've ever realized before, but that is why they wanted the king.
Okay.
They wanted a leader because Samuel's sons were not following God.
Okay. So what kicks off the desire for the king, you're noticing, is their disappointment with Samuel's sons. So let's go one step back on the observation and notice just one other piece, and that is, well, go ahead. No, I was going to say, what we also want to notice here is that Samuel has handed over leadership to his sons. Okay? So before we recognize how displeased they are with Samuel's sons, we have to also recognize before that, Samuel has actually handed over leadership to his sons. And they have become judges. And so let's put some pieces together. They have become judges. They do not walk in the way of Samuel. And everyone's displeased with that. Okay, what else are you noticing? Did you want to say something, Tiffany? Okay. Say that. Go a little deeper into that.
Well, they're asking him to make a king.
Okay.
He's already handed over the reins.
Okay, so they're actually coming to Samuel to make a decision, even though he has already handed over leadership. Great observation. What else, Sandra?
He wants all
Yes, so they just clearly state, you are old. Which doesn't seem to be offensive. Jim, why are you tapping Tiffany there? I said, wow. Yeah, so they're making that statement, but they're still coming to him. Somebody, Nate, okay, and then actually Lorraine had her hand up, and then we'll go to Nate. Yes, so they want to be like the other nations, and what is it that they want to be like the other nations? A king. Yeah, Nate. Okay, what verse is that? 6? Yeah, mine says, this displeased Samuel, and yours said what? It was evil in his eyes. Yeah, that's an interest. Yeah, that's it. It just kind of adds a whole layer of it, it's just extra bad. Yeah, okay. It seems like I saw another hand go somewhere. Rod? Yes. That's an interesting, I would challenge making too big of a jump. We're not really told whether they travel or don't travel. But I think you are going down a really helpful place here. One of the things that's honored about Samuel, right before this in chapter 7, we're told that he travels all over the country. He's the circuit rider, as we said. And when you do that, you get to know the people. But it's not just that you get to know the people, they also get to know you. And so the connection you have with the people is quite different. And there seems to be clearly a disconnect between the people and Samuel's sons. And whether that's because they did not ride the circuit or not, they're not necessarily told that. But I think you're asking a good question with that, for sure. Greg?
It's like when he prays, the Lord tells him that they have not rejected Samuel.
Yes.
But rejected God.
Yeah, so let's start with this as the place of interpretation. So Samuel seems to be, he is displeased or it's evil in his eyes, this request for a king. So let's just put some pieces together. There has been leadership. Moses, Joshua, and then we shift into these judges who end up leading the people. And Samuel he is what we now know as the final judge. Sort of. His sons would probably be the final judge, but he's the final judge with some level of authority, okay? Now, the question we might have is, what is the difference between a judge and a king? You still have a leadership role. You still have final say. What's the difference between a judge and a king? And I was thinking about this today. I think the way to describe it best is the judge is still of the people. The king is above the people. The judge comes about from God, from within the people, and they don't seem to have any sort of special authority, or they're not given any sort of special rights or even ownership as the king does. A king owns more things and demands more things. We're about to read a little bit more about that. But a king it lords himself over the people. A judge judges and leads the people from within the people. And so you just don't have necessarily the same kind of caste system that you would have with a king. And that's the big shift. Up until this point, the land of Israel is known as a theocracy. They are a government run by God. I should have looked up the actual definition of the ocracy part of when we say democracy, whatever. It's like the type of government you have. They are one that's that's driven by God and God alone. So the judge says, I've got to do something. Let me appeal to the Lord. Any of the leaders, Moses does this, Joshua does this. The judges, when they're at their best, they do this. They appeal to the Lord tells them what to do, they move forward. A king is not necessarily always going to do that, yet they retain their power. And so, up until this point, everything's been all about what the Lord's going to do. Now, Samuel, as the judge, is sitting there and he's going, they're rejecting the style of leadership that I have. And so the Lord just kind of takes some kindness on him and says, look, it's not about you. This is about me. He recognizes that the people are asking for a king not because they only want to be like the other nations, like they want to, just because they want to have a king. They're also rejecting God as their king. It's much easier if a human being just makes the decisions. We can see him, you know. It makes us feel like we're like everybody else, the classic comparison trap. And what's even more is that they've always wanted to be like the other nations. That's why they continue going to the other gods. And God even brings that up. They've been doing this from the day I brought them out of the land of Egypt. Over and over again, they reject me. They look to other gods. They're constantly wanting to be like the other nations. Now, though, they're just explicitly saying it. We want to be like the other nations. It is a really big, I think it's a big moment of conviction on the people of Israel. And so, Samuel has to relent. God says, look, don't take offense to it. Listen to what the people are saying. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Now, just go to the sons for a second. I think this is really important to watch this because we live in a world where it's really hard to divide out our children's successes or failures from our own successes and failures as a parent. And even over the last 20 years, it has gotten much, much worse in our culture to where we actually have a problem that's been titled overparenting. And books have been written about it. When I was on campus, this was one of the things I fought the hardest. A parent calling me to talk to me about their child who's on campus in my ministry as an adult. I can't talk to you about these things, that your child's an adult, Or Mary Catherine telling stories of working at the seminary and the business office and parents of seminary students, graduate level studies, calling to want to talk about their child's. It's like, no, this is not how it works. Okay. So all of this to say, we struggle very often dividing our children's successes and failures with ours. And the reality is, that's not healthy. Most often, our children, regardless of how we train them, they have to make their own decisions. And sometimes those decisions are not ones that we would want them to make. You never see Samuel apologize on behalf of his sons. Instead, he understands the issue here. Eli is the same. Now, we did deal with the patriarchal culture. He's the priest. He really should be making sure that they are not doing the unholy things. But it had less to do with him as a parent and more to do with him as the priest and the one in charge of making sure that holy things stay holy. Does that make sense? And so in this situation, Samuel's sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, but no one's blaming him. They're blaming the sons. And I think sometimes, I just wanted to bring that up because I think sometimes we struggle with this in our culture. So here's what it leads to, and I don't want to go too far down this path because I could talk about it for hours. Sometimes we get into the situation where we want to help our children avoid failure at such a high level that we end up doing everything for them, and in the end, we take away their ability to be responsible. And then what's worse then, We want them to be so successful that we end up doing many things for them so that they are successful. And now whose success is it? It's not theirs. It's ours. And so in the end, what we've tried to do is set our kids up to be able to have all the great things in life. And what we've done is we've stolen their responsibility from them. And now they're not even responsible for their failures. They're also not responsible for their successes. So like if your kid wins a soccer game and you say, we won the game, and it's like, well, were you on the field? But that happens a lot, you know? And so this is the kind of thing that is becoming a really hard issue within our culture. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to talk about it because I think it's a really important issue that we don't have time to deal with tonight. But you're just watching right here. Samuel's kids, this is a holy man. I mean, unbelievably holy. And his children make a bad decision, make many bad decisions. And in the end, it's actually what causes, as you noted, Diane, it's what causes the people to say, we don't want this anymore. We would really prefer a king. Yeah. We have somebody out here screaming. Oh, is that a kid? Yeah, I think that we still have a screamer out here. Yeah. There was a car accident and the police are involved. We're okay. Any thoughts about, not the screamer, but any thoughts about the issues of the Samuel so far? Yeah, Nate? Well, I think it's a good question. Is he guilty of nepotism? Is that what you're saying? Because he set his sons up? Just over-parenting? Potentially, but I think this is it's actually a natural thing for them to pass this thing on from generation to generation. The issue of over-parenting comes when if his kids aren't being successful, stepping in and in essence triangulating and saying, oh, no, my kids aren't that bad. This is the excuse for why they didn't do this well, you know? I think instead Samuel's just kind of like, yes, they're not doing great. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, this is even its own topic that could go on for a long time too, generational sin. And it's something we find actually within the text, within the scriptures throughout, the reality of generational sin. We know it in our own homes. Many people have dealt with that, generational sin. And sometimes it can feel like a curse that can't be broken. That's a lie of Satan. The reality is we can break generational sin through the power of Jesus if we're committed to it. And many of you, actually, I know your stories, many of you have been a part of breaking the power of generational sin. And so, I think that's maybe at play a little bit here, absolutely. Yeah.
When I first started reading this chapter, I was thinking there doesn't seem to be a difference in whether you're a judge or you're a king.
Yes.
And then as it finished that section that you read, God clearly said, remind him what a king does.
Yeah.
Wait,
don't go too deep because we're about to get into that. Yeah, we're going to read it. Yeah.
My point is, going back to the judge, maybe he raised his sons correctly, and maybe in going around, they had continued losses in the way they judged that caused the people to turn.
Yeah, we're not really told why they're making poor choices, but there are a lot of ways to guess about that. I mean, power in and of itself, it can pollute. It can pollute the mind. We see it all the time. There's many reasons why they're doing the unholy things. The point is, they are doing that. And the people are kind of tired of it. So you have this mixed reality. The reason is Samuel's sons aren't doing they're not living in holy ways, not leading like he would. But then also you're dealing with that paired with also the generational sin of wanting to be like the other nations. And now you put these two things together and you have something that's even more offensive to God. They're rejecting me just all totally, total rejection. Somebody behind Pam. Yes. I think that's a great observation, Pam. If you couldn't hear her, she said oftentimes we see a stern part of God, or at least that's the one we notice the most. But right here we're seeing a softer side of God, and that is his grace, I would call it, to Samuel, and also just to recognize, you can see his sorrow, I think, in this too. God's disappointment in, as we'll watch throughout all of the Old Testament, as we move even deeper into the Kings and what the prophets are dealing with, you can see and hear in the prophets his own sorrow, his own disappointment at the people rejecting him over and over again, which is just even more foreshadowing of Jesus himself, who also is like that lamb who was slain. He goes like a lamb silent to the slaughter. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Karen? Yes, Kiriath Jearim. I think his name, if I'm remembering, his name is Abiathar. Abinadab's house, and Eleazar, his son, guards the ark. There, it's at the very beginning of chapter 7. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. They're not different priests. They're all still in the line of priests. And what we're going to see as we get into deeper into Samuel, and especially as we get into 2 Samuel, David's going to bring the ark from Kiriath Jearim into Jerusalem. And we'll watch as that actually in 2 Samuel, they will connect the dots between the priests of what will become the temple in Jerusalem are still connected to the priests that were even there with Eli, if that makes sense. Yeah. All right, any other thoughts for you? Yeah, Nancy? Yeah. That's a great observation. How did we jump from the whole house of God repenting and turning back towards the Lord to, hey, give us a king? I'll notice two things about that. One is oftentimes the way the leader is, so the people go. Okay? Unholiness at the top typically leads to unholiness at the bottom as well. I think a distraction from that, we see that over and over again with the judges, don't we? A continual malaise, I would call it, when it comes to we've done the work of seeking after the Lord, and then we just get sort of like lulled into a sleep of we don't really care so much about how our lives are lived, to, oh no, there's a panic situation, let's turn to another God, or turn to some other leader, or whatever it may be. And unfortunately, this is the rhythm that we see throughout the whole book of Judges, and it's spilled over into the life of the judges here. And spoiler alert, it will spill over into the kings' lives too. So Nancy's asking, did the people get distracted off of Samuel as well? And I think the reality is Samuel goes back home to Ramah and hands over leadership to his sons. basically retired. I don't think it's a failure. I mean, you have to retire at some point. I wouldn't call that a failure by any means. He's old. I mean, at some point you're going to die. I'm sorry, everyone, you're going to die. Yeah. And the reality is you can't always lead until you die. And you do have to, at some point you have to hand over. Eli stopped being able to see. Do you remember that? There's a point where there's a natural handing over of leadership. It's just if the leaders aren't prepared or if they're not in it, for what God wants, it's going to impact the reality of everything around it. I think for the land of Israel, unfortunately, this becomes a story that is not going to just only be in 1 Samuel. This is the same story that was in Judges. It's going to be the same story that's in 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles. It finds its way through the whole thing. Yeah, Nate, sorry. Yeah. I think that's a great perspective. They're so ineffective as judges that the elders just totally bypass. I mean, you've done that before, and Dad is not getting you what you wanted, so you went to Mom, and you got what you wanted, or the opposite, or whatever. Who knows how your house dynamics are? But this is, absolutely. But I think it shows the desperation of the people to do something about these sons. But then also, they could be using it as an excuse to be able to turn to have a king so that they may be like the Lord. There's one last thing I want to show you before we jump into the next section, and that is Deuteronomy chapter 17. So go with me over to Deuteronomy 17, because it's an interesting thing here. When we read this, if you're going to maybe give God's perspective, it's like, I don't want a king. I didn't want them to want a king, but they want a king, and so we're going to give them a king. And it's not good, but they're rejecting me, not you, Samuel, that kind of thing. God doesn't seem to be encouraging a king. Look there in Deuteronomy 17, starting in verse 14. If you have a subtitle, it's probably just called The King. Here's what it says. When you enter the land, when, not if you enter the land and this happens, when you enter the land, the Lord your God is giving you, and you have taken possession of it, and you've settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the other nations around us. Be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. And then goes through this whole thing. These are all laws and rules about what the king should do. All from the positive perspective, meaning there's no what we're going to read in the next section. Here's what a king will do for you, and it's all negative. It's just saying this is what the king should do. Don't take too many horses, too many chariots. Have a copy of this law. Read it often. That kind of stuff. When you read this, wait a second. They always knew they were going to have a king. So in a way, they're actually just quoting Deuteronomy 17. Okay, it's the time when we are here to ask for the king. Now, there are probably some scholars who would say maybe this was written in later, Deuteronomy 17. Maybe this was added in. I have no idea. But the reality is God knew this would happen. God understood that this was going to happen, and He set up some sort of laws and rules for that king to be effective as a king under His authority and not to just go off on their own and do crazy things. Solomon, so look at verse 17. I have two names written in mine. Is that what you're laughing about? Yeah. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. And I have written out next to that Solomon. That's what he did. And his heart was led astray. Then the next verse. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the priests who are Levites. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and the decrees, and not consider himself better than his brothers, and yada yada. And I have written next to that Josiah. I think I preached on Josiah this summer, didn't I? Yeah. Josiah is the one who reestablished, he had his reform. Because what happened? All of the kings before him had literally forgotten the law. They had to find it when they were going in to just clean up the temple. And Josiah is like, what is this? Because they didn't follow this very rule. So the king, God knew there would be a king. It's just we're now at the point where they're asking for the king. It can't be understated, though, it doesn't seem like God wants a king. Again, even in Deuteronomy 17, you're going to say, we want to be like the other nations. And that's the issue that comes up. Yeah, Bo? Sure.
So when do we think that with reading Deuteronomy, reading the Torah, back then, that doesn't happen?
Yeah. So, I think this is the way it works, and this is the way it works even with us as parents, David teaches him how to be a king. Who knows what their conversations were like, but we just assume there's some sort of apprenticeship that happens. Solomon gets a kingdom that was not the kingdom that David got. I mean, think about that for a minute. The kingdom that David gets is one that's a little bit in shambles, has been taken over more by the Philistines than they expected. And so much of the beginning of David's kingdom is reclaiming land. And all of the battles that he has to have to get Israel back to a place of peace is not the kingdom that he hands over to Solomon. What he hands to Solomon is a place of peace. What he adopts is a place of war. So Solomon comes in, and he's learned how to be a king, but he's learned how to be a king, and he's receiving something totally different. Now, Solomon grows the kingdom to the largest it will ever be. And what comes with that is incredible wealth. And so what David might have had some temptation for, Solomon has even more temptation. And he hasn't had to fight for these things in the same way. And so Solomon, this is just how this stuff works. And all of a sudden Solomon goes, I kind of like this privilege. It feels good to have these things. I would much rather turn a blind eye to the fact that I have too many wives, because it feels good. I can show everyone how wealthy I am. All this kind of stuff. And it ends up being his undoing. How many times does God warn us through his wisdom about all sorts of things that we're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden we're like, that snuck up on me. I did not realize that. This is just how it works. And so even if David teaches him how to be such a great king as he was, Solomon still has to make his own decisions. Solomon still has to deal with the temptations that are there. And we end up finding ourselves down the road a ways to where Solomon's sons are like, just give me the power and I'll do with it what I'll do with it. Okay, let's look at what happens when you're a king, or when you have a king. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your men servants and your maid servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. Then Samuel said to the men of Israel, everyone go back to his town. Okay, we've got a few minutes. What are some of the things you're noticing the most, Sandra?
My version says, and that our king may judge us and go out.
Oh, okay, so hers says, instead of will lead us. Okay, well, it's kind of the same word, the judge. Our king will judge us and go out before us. They're saying, we don't want just a judge, we want a judge who also is in charge of us. Yeah. Julia? 1/10 is mentioned a couple of times. The tithe, or in this case, the tax. Yeah. What else are you noticing? Dan? Yeah. Samuel's really trying to talk. So we're just going to mash up some interpretation here because we're running out of time. This is prophetic. This is the prophetic role of Samuel. He is being prophet here. What is he doing? Mouthpiece for God. About reality here and now, being very clear. He's telling them exactly what will happen. This is what the Lord has said. I'm speaking on behalf of God here. Now just think about that. Someone that you revere, who you really trust, who stands up in front of you and says, don't do this because this is what's going to happen. And you say, what? We'll trust our own instinct. That's brazen. This isn't just foolish. This is brazen. They're not just accidentally falling into a trap. They're looking for it and stepping into it. It's bold. I mean, this is someone they have honored. They have come to him because they honor him. And he has said, this is what the Lord is saying. And they're like, we'd rather not. Yeah, hang on, Nate's got his hand, and then Pam. Yeah, that's right. Exactly, yeah. We want the king to fight our battles for us, meaning we want him to go do his thing over there. And Samuel's going, no, you're going to be fighting his battles for him. Did you catch that phrase? They will go in front of the chariots. You know how battle works there. You run ahead, and then we'll take the powerful beasts behind, and you'll have dented them so that we can maybe take them over. Pam, what were you going to say? Yeah, of course. I mean, this is the continual story. What's the recipe here? Not listening to the Lord, their God. You can't be any clearer. Nancy? Okay. Well, I think you're making a very good point. She asked the question, are these people any different than we are today? And the answer, from my perspective, is no, of course not. It's humanity. This is humanity. And we're being shown a piece of our heart that we always want, and that is We want to be like the other nations. Now, I'm not trying to, this is not replacement theology. America is not Israel. I'll say that 100 times. America is not Israel. But our hearts are like those hearts of these people. We want a ruler. We want something to be taken care of. We want to be like the nations, when it also means we don't then want to do the work of trusting God and trusting His wisdom. That's just a common reality. God's wisdom is clear. We often don't want to trust His wisdom because it's not full of the gold and the jewels and the power and the authority that we typically want. That's what it means to be like the other nations. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a great perspective. So just if you couldn't hear Bo, he's saying, in essence, the idea here is that the people, they hear Samuel, and then they almost want to unhear what Samuel said so that they can have a plausible deniability. Is that what we call it? I don't want to hear that you said that so that we can move forward and then we can be like all innocent. But then what God's saying there is, when you come crying to me, I'm not going to hear you. I'm not going to listen to you because I'm telling you up front right now, this is what's going to happen. I'm pretty sure I've said that to my children before. Yeah, Harry? I love it when someone starts a sentence that way. Ah. Yeah, I mean, so what you're bringing, man, you're tying this thing in a bow. Is God saying, I have been guilty of overparenting? And I would actually say, I don't think He's saying I've been guilty of overparenting. I think He's probably saying, I'm not going to overparent. That's what that's what good parenting is, just saying, okay, I've given you everything you need, and I'm not going to keep you from making a mistake, because if I do that, then you're never going to learn your lesson. And that's what He's, in essence, doing here. Go ahead. You said, it's happened twice now. You've said, no, we want a king. Okay, we'll give you your king. And you have to deal with the realities of that. Yeah, Nate? That's okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. That's a good question. Religiously, so if you couldn't hear Nate, he's asking, is this a replacement of the tithe to God for the tax to the king? The answer to that, I think, is no. And actually that's what makes this even worse. Religiously, no. Their religion is still Judaism. I mean, they're still practicing the things of Judaism. They just tend to bring other gods into the mix every once in a while, and now they're bringing a king into the mix. And so, in essence, what he's saying is another tenth, a tax is going to be going on top of this, so that the tithe stays there, but also now the tax is there as well. Yeah. You could see it, the tithe, though, sometimes, I want to be careful about this. I'm not going to say that. Never mind. Moving on. I'm just trying to be careful. Yeah. Yeah, Bo?
I think it's important to notice that every time that God allows people of Israel to warns them exactly what God.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a key difference in saying this is overparenting or not.
Right.
Overparenting, right? Just sweep it in, keep the consequences from happening.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, the way I see it, God's being the best God he can be.
Yeah, I mean, there's punishment involved as well. Yeah, but I mean, it's a hard thing to read. But again, what we're going to see is this is a momentum shift for the people of Israel. So let me just describe that real quick and then we'll close. From this point forward, Israel has a king. And there, in essence, is one king only that is primarily good and still not even good always, and that's David. And actually, his story ends not great. We're just going to watch that anytime people are taking on a high level of leadership in the name of God, when they often can turn away from God, and it ends up not going well. And this is going to be the demise of the kingdom of Israel. This is the demise of it right here. It starts right here. We'll read next week, Saul becomes the first king, and that doesn't go well. And in essence, it's just another moment where Israel has said, we're going to turn away from the Lord our God, from fully giving everything we have to the Lord our God. And so big shift here. And you can feel the sorrow that Samuel carries, and you can feel for sure the sorrow that God carries. And anyway, this is a really, really important passage. And we can't walk away without asking the question of ourselves, am I in this story? Am I in this story? And have there been moments in my life where I have said, I just want to be like the other nations? That's a tough thing to deal with, but it's a question we have to ask. All right, let me say a prayer for us, and then we've got enchiladas in there to eat. Okay, Father, we're grateful for this time together, and we're praying now that you would speak to us. We do not want to avoid or mishear your words. We do not want to lose sight of you. We know we don't have kings here like back in the day, but we have made kings of people. And we have turned our eyes from you. We don't want to do that anymore. So come, Lord, be our King. We are your people. We pray this in your holy name. Amen.